Everybody, good morning. I want to cover a couple of things real quick, but first, a brief announcement. I have not forgotten that I want to put together my chats from the early conversations I had with Detective Bauer, aka AlexVA slash Alex slash Zach, because he played all three roles. And I want to explain exactly what happened with that. I've done it before in expanded form, or I want to chunk it down to the parts of the conversation that the trolls do not share, and also as a means of explaining how police manipulate and prosecutors manipulate context in order to tell their story. So, as a preliminary to that, because this is what I have some time for at the moment, I'm going to talk about how prosecutors tell the story or how the story is told from the defense standpoint. And the story is called your case. The story is called your legal argument. That's the vehicle through which it's told, I guess you could say. Now, this isn't legal advice. I am not a lawyer in any way. I'm a trained professional who happens to observe what they were doing in my case, as well as many other cases. And I have some prior experience in the court, though, because I had to fire my attorney who didn't get me much early on in the child support issue when I brought my ex-wife to the family court in Alexandria, um, simply because I was told by people, "Hey, if your ex-wife violates the, you know, agreement that you have with her to see the child and such, then you can fight that." And of course, what I ran into is a buzzsaw of what it amounts to legal shenanigans, legal maneuvers, um, lies, cheating by attorneys, absolute cheating by attorneys. In fact, one attorney told me somewhere in the process between then and when I ran into the criminal case after having really nothing more than a parking ticket or a speeding ticket here and there over many years. Um, this attorney said to me, it's not like it was in the old days. You could go and kind of negotiate with the other side. The other side you have to watch because they play these tricky little games. I've heard attorneys talk about their opponents. Oh, who they want to know who their opponent is, and you know that if you're going into battle, whether you're on the soccer field or playing football or you're in a band competing in a band singing contest or something against the other side, you want to know something about the opponents so that you can exploit their weaknesses and consider their strengths and then go against them. Well, it's no different here. Okay. And again, this is not legal advice. This is a layman's terms of what he saw and what you need to consider. So let's talk about the legal argument. The legal argument is what you, as a defendant, or the opposition as the plaintiff, sometimes called complainant, put against you to the court. And before you even get to that, you need to understand. And if you don't want to believe this, then you need to wake up. It's not about truth. It's not about justice. Although they say that, because if they say whoever has the cleverest or the best argument, the people will start saying, wait a minute, it's not about truth. I mean, why aren't we concerned about the truth? We are told in school that justice and truth are the same thing. They are not. Remember, the law changes. The truth never changes. The truth is what it is. It's immutable, unchangeable. I mean, certain facts happened, certain things happened, and what they mean at the time happened. That's called context. And that's what takes an awful beating. Not only does the truth take a beating, but the context. In other words, you can say, if somebody is walking down the street and you see somebody knock over a bicyclist as you're coming around the corner, and you just think that's an outrage. This bigger person knocking over the bicyclist. Well, what you may not see is that the bicyclist deliberately rammed into this person. Of course, if you're assuming you know the meaning by that last 2-second clip that you saw, everybody knows that that's not the whole story. Well, it's the same thing here. It's very simple to understand in theoretical terms. What happens is the legal argument is the story that the other side, or your side too, but the other side is more cards, the prosecution. The story is the one that they tell, and it's often not the full story. Now, be, there wouldn't be rules and laws to try to catch these things if there hadn't been shenanigans in the past. I think that's just, common sense. So if why would there be a rule that says that the prosecution has to turn over to the defense all the evidence they plan to uh, put against you? They have to turn that over. Well, why? Because of course you need to see what it is they're going to present to the judge or the jury, because if it's just before judge, as I had before Judge Devine, it's called a bench trial, right? And that means the judge decides everything. If it's before a jury, that's called a petit jury, P-E-T-I-T jury, or we just say a jury trial. Petit jury separate from the grand jury, which is a different system. The grand jury is a bunch of citizens, grand jury, again, a bunch of citizens who are presented one side of the story by the prosecution. That's our system. And they bring in their witnesses. The defense or the defendant is not allowed to be there. And the citizens get effectively and oftentimes manipulated into looking at a little bit of the evidence. And their only argument, their only task, I should say, is to decide, is there enough reason under this grand jury system to indict, that is, to formally accuse the person, the defendant, somebody like me. That's their job. And then they sign what's called a true bill. Okay, that's a different system. I'm talking about the 12 jurors who sit and watch the evidence and listen carefully and take notes, and then go deliberate and make a decision about your fate. And God help you if they're intelligent, thoughtful people, or what most people are today. If you look around, many people are not particularly thoughtful or considerate, or um, nor do they care what really happens to you. I think that that's a fair estimate, and it is, again, my opinion. So back to the legal argument. What is that argument? You might think, well, they're going to tell the story and they're going to focus on the justice and the truth, because another rule that got violated a lot in the past is that people got up and lied, and they still get up and lie, lawyers do, but there are rules against that. You can be sanctioned if you lie, okay? You can be punished if you lie. You can be disbarred if you have a lot of really big whoppers, right? But lawyers do it all the time. I remember Ellen Degg, D-A-G-U-E, a lying guardian ad litem attorney, a weasel in the Alexandria court, came by my home many, many years ago because they kept losing the cases. And they worked out a scheme where she came by, she befriended me, she looked at the house, the idea it was a visit, and everything we talked about, which was very, very different than what she presented to the court. She openly lied to the court, and the court believed her. They believed her. Now, my recommendation is, if you're in a custody battle, for example, and you have a guardian ad litem or somebody, I don't care if it's a probation officer you have or whatever, have somebody else there if you can, film the whole thing, have somebody recording it to keep everybody honest. But they have a rule that says lawyers have to tell the truth, and very often they lie. Now, before we get to any of the lying, okay, because this is just a preliminary telling you what happens. There's a whole book of rules of evidence. I say a book, it's online, but you have the rules of evidence, how to present things, when you can present evidence, under what circumstances the other side can ask that evidence be denied. Like the defense can say, that evidence has all kinds of problems with it, right? Like when Ghost CC Unit claimed that he had all these chats with me trying to meet some kid in the forest. Interestingly enough, he never brought those into court, and he never showed up for them. Okay, and that's because they were BS. And the prosecution said to my attorney in a rare moment, "Yeah, we can't prosecute this guy, me, because There's no evidence. There's a videotape that's heavily edited. And the trolls salivate over that because they believe that a picture is worth 1,000 words, which is a common adage, but it's not true always, right? For the reasons I've illustrated earlier in this video with the bicyclist being hit by a much bigger person, and you think you saw what happened, but you didn't. So you have rules of evidence. You also have rules of procedure, and there are local rules and there are state rules. And I don't want to bore anybody with the great, uh, minutia of it, but effectively, the court case that you're presenting, your argument, is moved, it wins or it fails largely based on the ability to make your argument and to savage your context of the other guy, or to, explain it, if it's you, the defendant, in a way that the jury understands. And the more complex it is, and sting cases can be very complex because there are a lot of minute parts, and that's one of the reasons they're very susceptible to um, comments like this from the prosecution. This is very simple. It's about, and everybody has been taught and if you pardon the term, groomed, and it's been suggested to the public that there are people hiding in the bushes all the time trying to hurt your children. And that's not borne out by the facts. It's not borne out by the research. It's not borne out by the interviews. And we take the worst case scenarios all the time, like the Adam Walshes and the Jacob Wetterlings, and they become the standard when in fact they're not the rule. They are very minor exceptions, as horrible as they are. But remember, then, you can be branded a sex offender when you were 17 dating a 16-year-old girl and you turned 18 and somebody didn't like the picture that you sent, or she sent you a picture, and it could be just, relatively minor, but the argument that the prosecution, or I should say the calculus about the argument, the bet that they make when they meet with the police officers, etc., is to say, can we win this case? Is it winnable? It has nothing to do with whether it was true. It has nothing to do with whether justice is served. That's why we had a kid in Stafford County a few years back who was up on the very case I was suggesting to you, where you are underage and you turn 18, and then they hit you with CP charges, child porn charges. He didn't have any, but it ruined just the stigma, just the suggestion, just the fact that they dragged him through the mud, destroyed his one big ambition, which was to be a military officer. Because if you go to be a military officer, you can't have any stink on you. And of course, it ruined his entire career, just so somebody could get a statistic. So it was the argument they put forward. It wasn't the truth, it was the one they were able to make that won the day. That was having him face 150 years for teenage dating, Romeo and Juliet cases. And as I said, in my case and in many of the sting cases, which are more complicated, that's a great opportunity for the other side to muddy the waters. And when you muddy the waters enough, and you can prevent our team, for example, from being able to demonstrate that these were messages from on Verizon, okay? And that the judge says, well, how do you know they're authentic? Because you didn't have a Verizon representative there to authenticate them, even though they said Verizon everywhere on them, right? Judges will often tip the hand one way or the other. All right, we had a judge in the Ryan Pick case who had a police officer came up and he said, "Well, we have a video of Mr. Pick from the waist down masturbating, and we're gonna talk about that." And the Mr. Pick's attorney said, "Well, wait a minute, where's the video? You don't even have the video." But the police officer said, "Well, I can describe it." Well, that was good enough for the judge, just describing it. Think about that for a moment. You're laid low, you're given additional time because a police officer described something and he said that the chats were authentic, and that was good enough for the judge, right? So, again, it's not about justice, it's not about fairness, it's not about the truth. It's about who can make the better argument, who can convince the jury. And people know that intellectually, but yet when you hear that somebody's been convicted, what does the public do? It judges. It says this person must have been this person must have been that. In my case, people said, I can't believe he did that. He doesn't seem like he's that type of person. You're right, he wasn't. And there are many other people like that. Now, that's not to say you don't cross over the line and that you may make inappropriate comments. I know that some people that I've studied have done just that. Okay. But how do you know in the moment what the inappropriate comment is versus the comment that is manipulated or put out of sequence? We have cases where it's more complicated because the police use snipping tools and other things to manipulate the conversations around. We've seen evidence of that. We've seen evidence that they've lost, corrupted, damaged, withheld evidence. We have shown videos on this channel or posted videos where prosecutors themselves have talked about how other prosecutors have gotten in trouble for doing some nasty things, and one of them is withholding evidence, knowing full well somebody was innocent, but they had to get a nice green check mark or whatever you want to call it on their record so that they looked good, so that they won an election, so they looked like they were tough on crime, right? So remember that the next time, this is getting a little long, so I'm going to wrap it up. The next time you hear somebody say, oh, well, they were convicted, you should say, so what? What is the evidence? What is really happening here? Not just the evidence they showed in court, but the evidence that they didn't show. And what was the context? What was going on here? As I've said in my case and in other people's cases, they've withheld contextual evidence. Okay, evidence that wasn't what's called exculpatory. Exculpatory means things that would suggest that you are innocent, versus inculpatory, things that suggest that you are not innocent. So they'll put some of those things forward and withhold the other parts. Okay. And they were able to do that very successfully in my case, as well as many others. They also take your weaknesses, finally, against you. And I want to talk just a minute about that. Oh, your weaknesses. You mean your desire to prey on children? No. If you have an addiction, we've seen that over and over again. If you were drunk at the time, we've seen over and over again. We understand that being drunk or high can impair your judgment. We understand that. But somehow in a sex case, we don't think that that applies. They can take advantage of your desire to help somebody, your sincere desire to help someone. In my case, I have a long history of helping students. Any of my former students who are watching this knows full well that that's what I've done my whole life. I helped many, many people out. I have pages still. I found the other day files I wrote, letters of recommendation, where I talked about specific things I'd done for students over the years and why this college or this scholarship or whatever should select this person. My record there is true. It's invaluable. It's the truth. But none of that ever came out. Okay. The students who decide to come forward willfully and willingly never got a chance to testify. In fact, one young man who's an attorney came and was willing to testify. He sat there all morning, even though he had a 7-month-old daughter at home with his wife, but he went out of his way to see if he could help. Now, this same young man, I'm told, left after the first half, after they had a semi-damning video where they showed the interrogation of me, where I seemed confused and I was, it was characterized, I was being evasive and stuff. And I was confused because of trickery that Detective Bauer had used, and the fact that they didn't show the entire video. They didn't show at the end part. and they kept putting the phone down and turning it around and switching phones and connecting parts of conversations that didn't go together. And you see me say, wait a minute, no, that's not what happened. That's not how it went. No, I didn't do that. No, that's not what I meant. Why are you characterizing it like that? None of that was positioned as, you see how they're manipulating, you see how they're twisting things around. They never did any of that. And my attorney wasn't that great, because another thing trolls will say is, well, you should have hired a better attorney. That's like the Monday morning quarterbackers, right? Who say, well, they should have run this play instead of the one they ran. The one that I said they should run, and now that it didn't work, I changed my mind after the fact, right? It's just not that simple. And lawyers will lie if they can get away with it sometimes. They will twist things around, and they will simply use strategy to go one direction instead of another, which again has to do with winning the argument. It has nothing to do with justice, and it certainly has nothing to do with the truth. This is Norman Michael Asian with ICAC Unpacked. Have a good day.